3. Classified. Highest. Encryption only. You are the best in your field. The best soldiers, tacticians, sappers, communicators, survival experts. I picked you personally because I want you to train the best commandos in the galaxy. You'll have everything you need, whatever you want, except one thing: home. This is a top secret project. You'll not tell anyone where you're going, and you'll not leave Commando, ever. As far as your friends and family are concerned, you're already dead. Jango Fett, recruiting his hand-picked commando instructors. The Suvoldar, in the Mandalorian tongue, those who no longer exist. The Nemoidians had a taste for elaborate and wholly inappropriate grandeur, and Gershoken despised them for it. Likanekit's huge villa was set on top of a hill overlooking a Kushayan plantation, a foolish choice given the prevailing winds, but it seemed to satisfy the Nemoidians' need to show he was boss. The location might have made sense from a military perspective, but as Inkikit was a bean-counting coward like all of his kind, he didn't need defensibility either. No, the Nemoidian was a Dikut, a complete and utter Dikut. Hoken ran up the hedge-flanked steps of the veranda spanning the entire front of the building. Headdress tucked under one arm, his shadow gun, knives, and rope spike provocatively visible in his belt. He wasn't rushing to see his paymaster. Oh no. He was just in a hurry to get the meeting over with. He ignored the servants and minions and swept into Ankit's spacious office, with its panoramic view of the countryside. Kurura's commercial overlord was watering pots of flowers on the windowsill. He paused to flick one with his fingertip, and it sprayed a powerful, sickly scent into the air. He inhaled with parted lips. "I do wish he would knock, Hoken," Ankit said without turning around. "It's really most discourteous." "You summoned me," Hoken said flatly. "Merely checking on the progress of your conversations with the Jedi." "Had there been any, I would have called you. You haven't killed him, have you? Do tell me you haven't. I need to know if his activities will affect market prices. I'm not an amateur, but one has to do the best with the staff one has, yes? I do my own dirty works, thanks." "No, he isn't talking. He's rather resistant for the Jedi." If Ankit had had a nose, he would have been looking down at Hoken. Hoken controlled an impulsive urge to cut this glorified shopkeeper, this grocer, down to size. For all his height, the Nemoidian was soft and weak. His only strength contained within his bank account. He blinked with passionless, liquid red eyes. Hoken almost reached for his rope spike. "Jedi do not visit worlds like this to take the therapeutic waters, Hoken. Have you confirmed that he has an associate?" "He is a Jedi Master. He was seen with a Padawan. Not a very discreet Jedi Master, it seems." Fulia couldn't have been good at calculating odds, or he'd never have started on Garui in the tavern. But at least he was prepared to stand up for himself. Despite all that soft, mystical nonsense he spouted, Hogan admired guts, even if he rarely tolerated them. They were always in short supply. We'll find the Padawan, and we'll find out what intelligence Fulia has, if any. Make sure you do. I have lucrative contract resting on this. Hogan had become practiced at controlling his urge to lash out, but he saw no reason to subject his mouth to the same discipline. If I succeed, it'll be because I take pride in my work. You need the credits. For the time being. But one day, Ankit, I won't need you at all. Ankit gathered his robes a little closer and drew himself up to his full height, which had no effect on Hokan at all. You must learn to accept your reduced station in the Galactic Order, Hokan, Ankit said. This is no longer the hierarchy of brute force in which your warrior ancestors thrived. Today we need to be soldiers of intellect and commerce, and no amount of strutting around in that museum piece uniform will revive your glorious past. Alas, even the great Jango Fett succumbed to a Jedi in the end. News traveled fast. Fett was a source of pride among the remaining handful of Mandalorians in diaspora. Even if he fought for money, he was the best. Ankit must have known perfectly well how much that comment would sting. Hokan was determined that the Namorians would see no evidence on his face to prove it. He certainly tried to keep that out of his mind when he was interrogating Fulia. Much as he wanted to blame all Jedi for the humiliation of a cultural hero, he had to be clear why he was smashing the Jedi's bones. Revenge was unprofessional. He took a careful breath. Do you keep Gadans as pets, Ankit? I hear some off-worlders do try. Gadans? No. Filthy little creatures. Most savage. But if you did keep one, and didn't feed it well, would you be surprised if it bit you? I suppose not. Then feed me well. Hokan turned and walked out, without being dismissed, deliberately unbidden, and deliberately fast, so that Ankit couldn't have the last word. He replaced his helmet and ran down the steps of the ludicrously extravagant villa. He didn't care if Ankit rented the whole planet out to separatist scientists. They weren't honorable enough to fight with real weapons, either. They got bugs to do their work for them. It was a disgrace. It was unnatural. Hokan felt in his blood-red jacket for the Jedi's weapon. It didn't look like much at all, and it was surprisingly easy to activate. Even though he suspected that fully mastering it might be another matter. A humming blue shaft of light, vivid as day, shot out from the hilt. Hokan swept its scythe style along a neatly clipped Talmud hedge, cutting its height in half. The lightsaber wasn't bad for a soft Jedi weapon. Hokan suspected the lightsaber looked at odds with his traditional Mandalorian helmet, and its distinctive T-shaped eye slit. But a warrior had to adapt, and Fuller had questions to answer. Docking Bay, D768, Fleet Support Air Station, Ord Mantell. The Narshada agri-utility crop sprayer on the pad looked as if only its rust was holding it together. It was, to use Jusik's uncharacteristically colorful description, an old clunker. And somehow, it was taking them to Quilora. It wouldn't attract much attention, flying over farming country, unless, of course, it broke up in flight. This didn't seem out of the question. Well, they don't build them like that anymore, Fai said. That's because not even the Hut Aviation Authority would certify this Nosh crate airworthy, Nina said, straining to prevent his pack from bending him over backwards. He was laden with nearly double the 25-kilo weight he was used to carrying, along with a powered emergency chute. Nina had never actually come across the HAA, but he'd absorbed every scrap of intel read, seen, or heard in his life. Anyway, all it has to do is get us down there. It's making a noble sacrifice, Drusik said, suddenly right behind them. He smiled and murmured, Dirk crate to himself, as if it amused him. Nina wondered for a moment if he'd broken protocol by using that phrase. Are you certain you can do this? I could ask Master Zay if he would allow me to accompany you. Nina wanted to laugh. But you didn't laugh at a Jedi, especially one who seemed to care what happened to you. We lost too many officers at Geonosis, sir. They can't grow you to order. The Padawan lowered his eyes for a second. It's considerate of you to think of me as an officer, Sergeant. You're a commander now, sir. We won't let you down. There's nobody better prepared for this than us. This is your first special operation, isn't it? Yes, sir. Doesn't that worry you? No, sir, not at all. The 6 P's, sir. Proper, planning, prevents, pie, inadequate performance, sir. Drusik appeared to be counting and then raised his eyebrows. This is real, Sergeant. Ah, for all their skills and wisdom, there were still some things that even Jedi didn't know. Nina hesitated to lecture Drusik. Wheel? Oh yes, Nina knew what wheel was, all right. Padawan Badan Drusik had certainly never seen the killing house on Commando. He'd never stormed the building with its twisting corridors and innumerable flights of stairs. He didn't know how many commandos died in training, when the rounds were live and the terrorists, or whoever the directing staff were being that day, aimed to kill and frequently did. He also had no idea what it was like spending 4 days lying prone in a scrape in the undergrowth on observation. Rifle ready, urinating where you lay, because you couldn't move and give away your position. He had no idea how you learned to judge the amount of charge required for rapid entry to a building the hard way, because if you didn't get it just right, in a hurry and under fire, it could blow your head clean off. 2-8 had learned that way. Drusik didn't know just how far and how long you could carry a wounded comrade when you had to. You probably didn't even know how to perform an emergency field tracheotomy with a vibroblade and a clean length of fuel line. It wasn't Drusik's fault. He had far bigger issues to worry about. There was no reason for a Jedi commander to concern himself with the details of a clone commando's life. But Nina thought he probably would, and he admired the Padawan all the more for that. "We'll be fine, sir," Nina said. "The training is quite realistic." Inside the shabby Narsh vessel, the tanks had been stripped out, and the bulkheads lined with securing straps and stealth sheeting that would render the ship's cargo invisible to any probe or scan. Nina realized that 4 men would be pretty cramped in there with packs and weapons. A couple of Blastech E-Reb repeating blasters were already stowed, and at Aten's request, 2 Trandoshan's LJ-50 concussion rifles. Aten's livid face wound was looking less alarming now. But he'd always have a scar. The back display could fix plenty if you used it soon enough, but it couldn't reverse scarring. He pulled himself through the open hatch with an APCRA blaster in one hand and his DC-17 strapped across his chest, just about keeping his balance under the weight of his pack. Daman, acting as loadmaster, gave him a helpful leg up and eyed the blaster. "Got a thing for Trandoshan's technology?" Daman asked. This'll deal with shields better than our E-Rebs," Aten replied. "And the LJ-50 is a nice backup when we take out the facility. Just in case. Republic doesn't make all the best gear." Nina wondered if Aten's ever talked about anything but gear. His squad must have been a miserable bunch, with a miserable instructor. Clones might have looked utterly standardized to outsiders, but every squad was altered slightly by the cumulative effects of its experiences, including the influences of the individual trainers. Every commando battalion had its own non-clone instructor, and seemed to take on some of his or hers unique characteristics and vocabulary. "We learn," Nina thought. "We learn fast. And unfortunately, we learn everything. Like dirt crate." Every squad developed its own dynamics as well. It was part of their hardwire human biology. Put 4 men in a group, and soon you'd have a pecking order defined by the roles and foibles that accompanied them. Nana knew his, and he thought he knew Phi's. And he was pretty sure he knew where Daman was heading. But Aten wasn't sliding into place just yet. Phi had a Geonosian force pike. He hefted it and smiled. "Where do you get that?" Aten asked, suddenly interested. "Souvenir of Geonosis," Phi said, and winked. Seemed ashamed to waste it. He flipped it over in his hand and twirled it, arm outstretched, missing Aten's by a calculated handspan. He didn't react. You wouldn't even need to use the power setting, would you? This thing's heavy. He brought it down in a slicing movement. Wallop. That'll make the eyes water. I don't think I need any souvenirs of Geonosis, Etten said. His tone was distinctly frosty. Indelibly etched, you might say. Hey, Nina cut in. Chat later, he said. Shift it, people. Nina already knew he would have his work cut out with Atin, and wondered if anything would trigger his natural urge to be one of the squad. He also wondered about his apparent negativity. He'll shake down sooner or later. He'll have to. Backing up to a convenient ledge on the port bulkhead, Nina unclipped his backpack. 45 kilos lighter, he eased between Phi and I-10 and peered into the cockpit. An R5 droid was at the controls. The unit was still fueling up the vessel from a droid browser, burbling and whistling to itself. Nina leaned across to plug his datapad into the console to confirm the flight plan and synchronize it with the vessel's actual path. The R5 didn't take any notice. It would fly the route it was given. Improvising, thinking on his feet, making the most of the resources at hand, were all part of operating as a commando. But so was acquiring adequate intelligence. What they had wasn't enough to plan a mission, and that meant they would either have to acquire it in the field or fail. Nina didn't want to fail Padawan Jusik. He ejected his datapad and edged back to the hatch, trying not to clip Phi or Atin. Calm silence from the time you take off, Jusik said. Leaning through the open hatch, the assault ship, the Majestic, is diverting to Kilora, and will remain on station parsecs from the planet until she receives your request for extraction. Then gunships will be at your transmitted location within the hour. Nina almost asked just how long the Majestic might wait, but he feared it would look as if he doubted his squad competence. He knew the answer. The ship would wait until Uthen was taken, even if that was several commando missions down the line. It wasn't waiting for them. We won't keep the Majestic waiting, Nina said. Anything else you need? Nina shook his head. No, Commando. Dunman stood to one side of the ramp, like an honor guard, waiting for the Jedi to leave. Very well, Jusik said, looking hesitant, as if he wanted to walk away, but thought better of it. I hope to debrief you on your return. Nina took that literally, although Jusik was looking at him as if it meant something else. It made sense for the Padawan commander to process whatever intel they might gain. Jusik turned and walked away, and Darman jumped inside. The hatch closed with a slight shudder, sending fine fragments of rushing metal to the deck. It only has to land, Nina thought. He searched on the hollow projections in his datapad and studied the three-dimensional flight path over fields, lakes, and forests. It was part real image, part simulation, projected onto an existing chart. They were looking at an area 30 clicks north of a small town called Emblani, a single-story building with shabby sheet metal roofing, ringed by an incongruously well-cut expanse of grass, nestled in a plantation of kuvara trees. Some of the image was blurred, but it was the best resolution that a surveillance remote could manage at that distance above the planet. Specs people wandered around an encircling path. It's the capture alive bit that complicates matters, Damin said, gazing at the image over Nina's shoulder. Or else we could just bomb it back into hut space. That's why they created us, Nina said, for the complicated jobs. He closed his eyes for a few moments to visualize the insertion. He saw it from takeoff to landing, smooth and planned, every detail, or as many details as their incomplete intel could furnish, and his own experience of 100 exercises could confirm. In this detached state, something occurred to him. He pictured Jusik's face and his awkward, nervous shrugs. He realized what the Padawan had meant when he said he was hoping to debrief them personally on their return. He meant good luck. He wanted them to survive. Nina, who had known for as long as he could remember that he was a soldier bred to die, found that intriguing. Gadans were about 30 centimeters long, fully grown, and it took a whole pack of them to bring down even a merly calf. But at night, when they emerged from their warrens and hunted, the farmers locked their doors and stayed clear of the fields. It wasn't so much their teeth that the locals feared. It was the deadly bacteria the animals carried. A minor scratch or a bite was almost always fatal, and Master Folier had used their entire supply of Bacta spray in administering the first aid to villagers, so Etain was as housebound at night as any of her posts. She could hear the little predators outside, squabbling and scrabbling. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and chewed on the thin breads, almost hungry enough to gulp down the stew, but not that hungry. A few bacteria are good for your immune system, she thought. You've probably eaten worse without knowing. But she knew this time. Leaving the bowl where it stood, she rolled the holochart sphere over and over in her palms, running through all the possibilities for getting the information to the Jedi Council. Stow away in a transport, possible. Transmit the data from ground? No. All transmissions were tightly controlled by the Nemorians. Any other message traffic from Krillora to Coruscant would draw instant attention. There was always the possibility of finding the right droid courier. But that was a long shot. and it might take so much time as to be useless. Perhaps she'd have to do the job herself. Lightsabers were superb weapons, but right now, she needed an army. The realization that she had beaten the odds to obtain valuable information, but was now unable to get it to those who needed it, almost crushed her. "I'm not done yet," she said aloud. But she felt that she was, at least for the night. Her eyelids felt heavy, and she braced her elbows on her knees, letting her head rest in her hands. A good night's sleep. She might have a better idea in the morning. Her eyes closed. Images of Coruscant, her clan, practicing passing a bowl by thought alone. A nice hot bath. Food she trusted to be clean. Then suddenly, every fiber in her body leapt at once. Heart pounding. Etain thought at first that she'd had one of those half-dreams, a falling that sometimes came when she was dozing off. But now she was fully awake and knew that she hadn't. Something had changed. Something in the Force had been altered, and forever. She jumped to her feet, suddenly clear what it was. She needed no training or education to understand it. Every instinct coded in her genes cried out. Something, someone, was gone from the Force. "Master," she said. She had suspected he was dead. Now she knew he was, and she knew it had happened right then. It was impossible not to wonder how and where, but she knew enough about the Nemoidians, hired muscle, and their techniques to guess. Ignoring the ever-present Gadans, she went to the barn door and swung it open. It was an act of helplessness. There was nothing she could do, now or ever. Something rustled in the grass. It was a solitary something, and it sounded larger than a Gadan. She noticed for the first time that the constant snuffling and squabbling of the Gadan packs had stopped. They'd gone. Etain felt for her lightsaber, just in case. Loud squawking and a flurry of rings made her start. A disturbed flock of leatherbacks rose into the air and scattered in the darkness. Trailing sparks of light from their scales, through the Force, she detected only small creatures with simple desires. And the male Merlee wandering along the fence, armed with such fearsome tusks that not even Gadans would risk approaching him. She looked up at the night sky. It appeared unchanging, constant, but she knew it never was. "They're coming," she thought. She thought she heard the old woman's voice, putting it down to grief and lack of sleep. Etain stumbled back inside and barred the door. It was just another crop sprayer, hired to dress the fields after the buck harvest, laden with bug killers and soil enhancers, and piloted by a droid. At least that was what the Nosh Crate's transponder had told the Quilora traffic controller. and judging by the absence of a missile up the tailpipe, he had believed it. Damin was still exploring the enhancements to his helmet and suit. "I used to think I wore this armor," he said. "Now I think it's wearing me." "Yeah, they spent some credits upgrading this since last time," Fi sighed. "Wow, walking weapon system, eh?" 200 clicks, Etten said without looking up from his datapad. He'd propped his helmet beside him, with the tactical beam pointed up to provide some light in the closed bay. Damin couldn't hear him over the noise of the vessel's atmosphere engines, but he could lip read easily enough. "Let's hope everything works." It was helmet on at 100 clicks. The squad was prepared both for a controlled landing and an early bailout, and free fall if they were picked up by separatist ground units. Damin hoped their luck would hold. They were landing heavy, with more gear than they'd ever used in training, and they'd have to hit the drop zone accurately to avoid an impossible trek across country. Accurate if they had to jump for it meant high altitude, low opening procedure. They could drift for 50 clicks if they opted for the safer, slower, high opening technique. Damin didn't relish being defenseless in the air for that long. Nano was studying his datapad, balancing it on his right thigh. A 3-dimensional shimmering hollow of their flight path played out at a handspan above it. He glanced up at Daman and gave him a silent thumbs up. "On course and on target," Daman returned the gesture. There was an art to loading up for a mission when carrying the firepower of a small army among 4 men. Daman had loaded his pack to capacity. The rest of his weapons and ordnance was in a second shockproof container that stood knee-high. The bowcaster, he loved that weapon, was strapped across his chest plate with jury-rigged webbing to leave his hands free for the DC-17. He had an assortment of detonators kept safely separate from the charges and other ordnance in the lower section. He was now so heavy, even without the extra equipment, that he had to bounce to get upright from a sitting position. He rehearsed standing a few times. It was tough. Fortunately, the squad would be inserted close to the target. He didn't have to haul it far. 100 clicks, Etten said. He switched off his spot lamps, helmets. The compartment was suddenly dark, and there was a collective hiss of helmet seals purging and re-engaging. They could only talk to each other at very short range now. On Quilora, anything more than 10 meters risked detections. The only visible light was the faint blue glow from the heads-up display in the visors. A group of ghostly disembodied T-shapes in the gloom, and the shimmering landscapes playing out from Nina's datapad. His head was tilted down slightly, watching the actual positions of the utility vessel in the simulated landscape. The sprayer started to lose height, exactly on course. In a matter of minutes, they would be bang. A shudder ran through the airframe, and then there was no engine noise at all. For a second, Darman thought they'd been hit by anti-aircraft fire. Nina was on his feet instantly, moving forward to the cockpit, accidentally racking Atin with his pack as he turned. Darman, without conscious decision, grabbed the emergency hatch handle and prepared to activate it for a bailout. Darman could see the droid clicking and flashing apparently, engaged in a dialogue of some kind with the vessel. The ship wasn't listening. Sarge? Bird strike, Nina said, deceptively quiet. Atmos engines fried. Can the R5 glide this thing down? It's trying. The deck tilted and Darman grabbed at the bulkhead to stay upright. No, that isn't gliding. That's crashing. Bang out, Nina said. Bang out now. The Nosh dirt crate hadn't let them down. It had just succumbed to being in the wrong airspace at the wrong time, and met the local avian species the hard way. Now they were plummeting toward the kind of landing not even the latest Catan armor could help them survive. Darman blew the hatch, and the inrush of air sent dirt and debris whirling through the cargo bay. The door fell away through the opening. It was pitch black outside, a challenge for a free-faller, even with night vision. Darman was starting to experience serious doubt for the second time in his life. He wondered if he was becoming one of those despised creatures that his training sergeant had called cowards. Go, 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 Nina shouted. Vian Aten eased through the hatch and stepped out. Don't try to jump. Just let yourself fall. Darman stood back to make way for Nina. He wanted to salvage as much gear as he could. They needed the repeating blasters. He grabbed some of the dismantled sections. Now, Nina said, you first. We need the gear. Darman thrust 2 sections at him. Take these, I said jump. Darman wasn't a rash man. None of them were. They took calculated risks, though, and he calculated that Nina wouldn't leave him. His sergeant was standing at the open hatch, arm held out imperiously, a clear sign to get on with it and jump. No, Darman had made up his mind. He lunged forward and shoulder charged Nina out of the hatch, grabbing the door frame just in time to stop from plunging after him. It was clear from the stream of expletives that Nina was not expecting this, nor was he happy about it. The extra pack jerked out after him on its tether. Darman heard one last profanity, and then Nina was out of range. Darman grabbed a strap and peered down, but he couldn't see his sergeant falling. And that probably meant nobody else could either. He now had a minute, more or less, to salvage what he could and get out before the utility hit the ground. He switched on his helmet lamp. He couldn't afford the time to listen to the rushing wind and the complete absence of reassuring engine noise. But he heard it anyway. He dropped the bowcaster and began lashing the blaster sections together with a line. It was a shame. He loved the bowcaster, but they needed those cannons more. Knotting lines was hard enough with gloves on, but was even harder when you were seconds from crashing. Dumbman fumbled a knot. He cursed. He looped the line again, and this time it held. He let out a sob of relief, dropped the weapon, and dragged the gear down to the hatch. Nobody could hear him at this range, and he didn't care what the droid thought. Then he stepped out into black void. The wind took him. There was no rushing landscapes beneath him yet to take his attentions from the heads-up display. He was free-falling at nearly 200 kilometers an hour, trailing sections of heavy cannon. He maneuvered into trekking positions, pack square across his back, rifle tight into his side, the remainder of his gear on the container that rested on the backs of his legs. When he deployed the canopy at 800 meters, he would release the container, and he'd use the powdered descent option, because that might save him from the unsupported, potentially lethal weight of cannon that was falling with him. Yes, he knew exactly what he was doing, and yes, he was scared. He'd never jumped with so much unsecured load in training. The canopy deployed, and it felt like he'd slammed into a wall. The power pack kicked in, hitting up the air around him. He could steer now. He counted down 15 seconds. Something flared into brilliant white flame beneath him, off to his right. The Nosh vessel crashing some 30 klicks short of the target zone. Darman realized he had thought nothing of leaving the R5 on board the stricken utility. It was expendable. And that was how he was seen, he supposed. It was surprisingly easy to think that way. He could see the ground now. His night vision could pick out the tops of trees right beneath. No. He tried to miss. He failed. He hit something very, very hard in the air. Then he hit the ground and didn't feel anything at all. 4. This is the true art of genetic selections and manipulation. A human is naturally a learning creature, but it is also violent, selfish, lustful, and undisciplined. So we must walk the knife's edge between suppressing the factors that led to disobedience and destroying that prized capacity for applying intelligence and aggression. Hallie Kay, Senior Research Geneticist of Commando. Nano was hauling in his canopy when the explosion jerked him upright. A column of bright rolling fire shot into the night sky above the tops of the trees. He knew it was hot and bright, because his helmet visor's filter kicked in to stop it from overwhelming his night vision. Even though he knew it was coming, his heart sank. Dahman probably hadn't made it. He'd disobeyed his order. He hadn't jumped when he told him to. So maybe you've lost a brother, maybe not. Either way, you'll lose two more if you don't get your act together fast. Nina triangulated the position of the blast, and then went on bundling up the freefall canopy, cutting away the lengths of cord before burying it. With a breaking strength of 500 kilos, the cord was bound to come in handy. He wound each length in a figure 8 around his thumb and smallest finger, and slipped the skeins into a belt pouch. Then went in search of his extra pack. It hadn't fallen far from him. The low opening technique worked well if you needed accuracy. Nina found the pack at the edge of a field covered in small, dark, furred animals that seemed fascinated by it, and were gnawing at the soft padding strip on one side. He flashed his spot lamp to scatter them, but they steered back up the beam, burst into angry chatter, and then turned towards him. It was unnerving, nothing more. Their little teeth snapped impotently on his armor. He stood still, assessing them, his databank scrolling in front of his eyes, and telling him that they were Gadans, and that they weren't logged as a hostile alien species. All the non-human life Nina had ever seen for real, other than Kaminoans and the various instructors, had been on Geonosis and through a blastocyte. He was utterly dependent on the intelligence loaded into his database. That, or finding things out for himself. All but one of the Gadans gave him up as inedible within a minute, and disappeared into the waist-high crop. The remaining creatures worried away at his left boot, a tribute to its tenacity, if not its intelligence. Those boots were spec'd to withstand every assault from hard vacuum to acid and molten metal. The little animal clearly believed in aiming high. Dahman would have found it fascinating, he was sure. It was a pity to lose him. He had all the makings of a good comrade. "Come on," Nina said, nudging the animal with the butt of his blaster rifle. I've got to get to work. Shove off." The Gaden teeth locked around a clamp, looked up and met his eyes, or at least it seemed like it. It could only have really seen a faint blue light. Then it let go and trotted back toward the field, pausing once to stare back at him, before disappearing into the hole in the ground. With all the ease of a diver, Nino took out his datapad and calculated his position. There was no GPS he could lock in to without the Nemodians detecting him. but he could at least use Dead Reckoning based on the sprayer's last position, matching features on the landscape to his chart. It was old-fashioned soldiering. He liked it. He had to be able to do the business when the tech wasn't there. Even if that meant using nothing but a Trandoshan blade. If you stab someone in the heart, they can still run. I once saw a man run 100 meters like that, screaming as well. Go for the neck, like this, Sergeant, Skarata had taught them. A lot about knives. Put a bit of right behind it, son. Still, tech had its place. A speeder bike would have been handy, although they hadn't thought they'd need them. The insert was supposed to be 5 clicks from the target. Never mind, he thought. It would make me look pretty conspicuous out here anyway. The gear would slow him on his way to the pre-agreed rendezvous point, but he'd get there if Fi and Aten had landed safely. They'd be heading for RV Alpha 2. He started tabbing, trying to make 10 clicks an hour, avoiding tracks and open ground. In the end, he had to drag the extra pack behind him, on straps like a sled. Tactical advance into battle, tabbing, as Karata called it, meant walking at 6 to 10 clicks an hour with a 25-kilo pack. But that's for ordinary men, the instructor would say, as if non-clones were subhuman. You are clone commandos. You will do better because you are better. Nino was lugging nearly 3 times that load now. He didn't feel better at all right then. He decided to add a portable repulsor lift to his new list of gear to request upon return. Quilura's moon was in its new phase, and he was grateful for that. In his light gray armor, he would have stood out like a beacon. Hadn't the top brass thought of that either? He stifled the uncharacteristically critical opinion about his superiors, and decided there had to be something he didn't know, but they did. He had his orders. Even so, he diverted to a narrow river shown on the holochart, and stopped long enough to smear mud over his armor and gear. There was no point chancing his luck. At 400 meters from RV Point Alpha, he slowed down, and not because he was struggling under the weight. A silent approach was necessary. He hid the pack he was dragging deep in the undergrowth, and recorded its location to collect later. Fi and Aten might have been tracked. They may not have made it at all. There was always the possibilities of ambush. No, he definitely wasn't taking chances. For the last 200 meters, he got down in the grass and crawled. But they were there, and alone. Nina found himself standing up into the beam from Fi's helmet, and he knew that the infrared targeting was centered at the point between his filtration mask and the top of his chest plate. It was a vulnerable point, provided one got close enough and used the right caliber rounds. Not many hostiles could get that close, of course. You gave me a start, Sarge, Fies said, holding his blaster clear and looking him over. He killed the light and indicated his chestplate. Great minds, eh? Fies' armor was no longer pristine either. Nina wasn't sure what he'd smeared over it, but it disrupted his outline well enough. The thought had obviously occurred to all of them. Aten was daubed with something dark and matte as well. Shape, shine, shadow, silhouette. Smell, sound, and movement, Nina said, repeating the rules of basic camouflage. If it hadn't been for Damian's absence, he would have found the situation funny. He tried. Shame they couldn't find something beginning with S to complete the set. I could, Aten said. Any contact from Damian? They were 40 kilometers from the point where Nina had landed. I saw the blast. He was last off. You saw him jump then? No. He was grabbing as much gear and ordnance as he could salvage. Nina felt he needed to explain. He shoved me out the hatch first. I shouldn't have let that happen, but I didn't abandon him. Aten shrugged. So what have we got then? We've got a brother missing. I meant by way of resources. He had most of the demolition ordnance. I know you meant that, and I don't want to hear it. If he could feel concern, even sorrow, for Damian, then why couldn't Aten? But it was no time to start a fight. They had to stick together now. A 4-man mission with 3 men. The chances of succeeding had plummeted already. We're a squad now. Get used to it. Fi interrupted. He seemed to have a knack for diffusing situations. All our gear's intact anyway. We can still put quite a dent in them if we have to. And what did they have to put a dent in exactly? They had a high-altitude drone recess of the target building, but no idea yet if the walls were just placid blocks or if they were lined with shock-absorbing alloy plates. There could be just the 30 or so guards seen walking the perimeter, or hundreds more holed up in underground barracks. Without better intelligence, they had no way of knowing just how much gear was enough for the job. It was a case of adding P for plenty, just to be sure. Nina liked to be sure. How much time are we going to spend looking for him? Aten asked. They know they've got company now. It wasn't exactly a silent insert. SOPs, Nina said. Standard operating procedures. That was how things should be done. How commandos expected them to be done. We get to each RV point for the time we agreed upon. And if he doesn't show, we'll go to the positions of the blast and see what's left. Then we'll decide if we are going to consider him MIA or not. You'd want us to search if it was you missing, Fi said to Aten. He can't call in, not at this range. too risky. I wouldn't expect you to compromise the mission for me, Aten said, distinctly acid. He's alone for fear effect's sake. Alone. Just shut it, will you? Nana said, the good thing about ultra-short-range comlix was that you could stand around and have a blazing argument inside those helmets, and nobody outside could hear you. Finding him isn't only the right thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do. Locate him and we find his gear, okay? Yes, Sarge, Fice said. Got it, Aten said. But there has to be a point where we consider him dead. Without a body, that'll be when Geonosis frees over, Nina said, still angry, and not knowing why. Until then, we are going to sweat our guts out to find him, provided it doesn't blow the mission. Now let's see if we can sling this gear between some poles or something. We'll never keep this pace up for tens of kilometers unless we find a better way of transporting it. Nina set his helmet comlink to receive long range anyway. There was no harm in listening. If Daman was out there, Nina wasn't planning on abandoning him. The clearing hadn't been there yesterday. Etain picked her way through flattened Kuvara saplings and into a circle of blackened stubble. Following Burhan's steps, the air smelled of smoke and roasted bark. He was swearing fluently. She didn't know much Kularin, but she knew a curse when she heard one. This is your lot again, Burhan said. He surveyed the fields, hands to his brow to block out the sun, breaking over the horizon. Now that it was daylight, they could see the extent of the damage from last night's explosion. What am I going to do? What's going to happen to our contract? It wasn't phrased like a question. The Namodians weren't known to be sympathetic about the host of natural disasters, constantly threatening the farming communities' precarious existence. But this was no natural disaster. The blast area spanned around 500 meters, and the crater at the center was 12, maybe 15 meters wide. Etain didn't know how deep it was, but a Trandoshan and an Ubis was standing at the edge of it, peering down, blasters in hand, looking as if they were searching in the soil. They didn't take the slightest notice of her or Burhan. She must have looked suitably starved and dowdy, rough enough to pass for a farm girl. It was probably too late to convince them the crater was caused by a meteor fragment. But at this point, Etain didn't know any more than they did. Why do you think it's my lot? She asked. Obvious, Burhan said sourly. I've seen loads of speeders and freighters and sprayers come down hard. They don't leave craters. They falls apart and burns, yes, but they don't blow up half the countryside. This is off-planet. It's soldiers. He kicked around some of the charred and blackened stalks. Can't you have your fight on someone else's planet? Don't you think I got enough problems? She wondered for a moment if he was considering turning her into Hoken's men for a few credits to make up for the loss of the precious bark. She was already an extra mouth to feed at a time when money he was counting on had just gone up in a fireball with much of his crop. It was time to find somewhere else to hide, and some other plan for getting that information off Krylora. Etain was still considering the scorched land when the Ubis and the Tendoshans jerked upright and turned to jog away toward the dirt track beside the field. The Ubis had one hand pressed to the side of his helmet, as if he was listening to something, a comlic probably. Whatever the summons had been, it had been urgent enough to get them running. It also confirmed that this wasn't just a Nosh sprayer, making an all too frequent crash landing. Etain waited a moment longer, then walked forward to peer into the pit to see what had so engrossed them. It had been a monstrous blast. The sides of the blackened crater were blown almost smooth, and there was debris everywhere. It was an enormous blast area for a small craft. She left her hand and walked around inspecting the ground, as Hoken's men had done. Not sure what she was seeking, she was almost at the Kuvara orchard before she saw it. The earliest sunlight caught a scraped metal edge of something embedded in the ground, rammed deep by the explosion. Etain crouched down as casually as she could, and worked the soil loose from it with her fingers. It took her a few minutes to expose enough to understand the shape and a few more to work out why the scorched colors were so familiar. It was disordered. The metal frozen in a moment of being torn apart by enormous force. But she was pretty sure she'd seen one intact before. It was a plate from an R5 astromech droid, a plate with Republic markings. They're coming. Whoever they were, she hoped they'd made it alive. Daman knew it was risky moving around by day, and the fact that his right leg seemed to scream every time he put his right on it didn't help matters. He'd spent 2 painful hours scoping out a shallow depression in a thicket about 100 meters from what passed for a road. Roots and stones had slowed him down. So had the pounding he'd taken hitting the canopies of trees during his landing. But he dug in now, and he lay under a lattice of branches and leaves on his belly, watching the road, sometimes through his rifle sight, sometimes with an electro-binocular panel that flipped down in his visor. At least the little animals that had swarmed over him in the night had disappeared. He'd given up trying to fend them off. They had explored his armor for a while, and then moved on to watch him from distance. Now that it was daylight, there were no more glittering eyes staring out from the undergrowth. He still wasn't sure of his positions either. There was no GPS network he could use without being picked up. He needed to get out and about and do a race if he was going to have any chance of aligning landscapes features with the holochart. He knew he was facing north, the arc of small stones around a thin branch. He'd stuck in the soil that charted the sun's progress and gave him his east-west line. If his datapad had calculated speed and distance correctly, he was between 40 and 50 clicks northeast of the first RV point. He'd never covered that distance on foot in time, not with the extra gear, and not with his leg in this state. If he dragged the pack, he'd draw a neat follow-me line through the vegetation. Darman eased himself over on his back, removed his leg plates, and unsealed his undersuit at the knee. It felt as if he'd torn a muscle or a tendon above the joint. He soaked the makeshift bandage with Bacta again and replaced the legging and plates before rolling back into position. It was high time he ate something, but he decided that he could wait a little longer. He checked the dirt road through the crosswise of the DC-17's electromag scope. The first time he had worn the helmet was the built-in display shimmering before his eyes. He had been overwhelmed and disoriented by the flurry of symbols in his field of vision. The rifle scope made it seem even more chaotic. Lights, lights, lights. It was like looking from the windows of Tipoca City at night, with the lamps and reflective surfaces of the refectory behind you. So many competing images that you couldn't focus on what lay beyond the storm-proof glass. But in time, that time being the short, desperate morning when the whole of Kilo and Delta squads first wore the HUD display while using live ordnance. He got used to it. Those who didn't get used to it fast didn't return from the exercise. He learned to see and yet not see. He was constantly aware of all the status displays that told him when his weapons were charging, and if his suit was compromised, and what was happening around him. Now he was focused solely on looking down a clear tunnel framed by interlocking segments of soothing blue, with a highlighted area to show when he had an optimum firing solution for his target. The information on range, environment, and the score of other options was still there. He could take them in without consciously seeing them. He saw only his target. A faint rumbling sound made him stiffen. Voices. They were approaching from his right. Then they stopped. He waited. Eventually, the voices started again, and two weakrays came into his field of view. Too slowly for his liking. They were looking at the road's shoulders with unusual diligence. One stopped suddenly and peered at the ground. Apparently excited, if if his arm gestures were any indication. Then he looked up and started walking almost directly towards Damin's position. He took out a blaster pistol. He can't possibly see me, Damin thought. I've done this by the book. No reflections, no movement, no smells, nothing. But the weak ray kept coming, right into the bushes. He stopped about 10 meters from Damin, and was casting around as if he'd follow something, and lost the trail. Then he moved forward again. Damin had almost stopped breathing. His helmet masked all sound, but it certainly didn't feel that way. The weak way was so close now that Damin could smell his distinctive sweat and see the detailed tooling on his sidearm, a KYD-21 with a hadrium barrel, and that there was a vibroblade in his other hand. Right at that moment, Damin couldn't even swallow. It's okay to be scared. The weakway stepped sideways, looking at Ray's height as if browsing for discs on a library shelf. It's okay to be scared as long as you... The weakway was right on him now, squatting over his position. Damin felt boots depress branches that were touching his back. And then the creature looked down and said something that sounded like "Gah." As long as you use it. Damin brought his fist up hard, under the weakway's jaw, ramming his own vibroblade up into the throat and twisting his fist off to one side to sever blood vessels. He supported the dead weight of the impaled weakway on one arm until it stopped moving. Then Damin lowered his arm, shaking with the effort, and let the body roll to the ground as quietly as he could. "What you find?" the other weakway yelled. "Ga-ui. Ga." No answer. "Well, here we go." Damin aimed his DC-17 and waited. The second weakway began running in a straight line toward the bushes, and that was a stupid thing for him to do when he had no idea what had happened to his comrade. They'd been lording it over farmers for too long. They were sloppy. He also made the mistake of pulling out his blaster. Damin had a clear headshot, and he took it almost without thinking. The weakway dropped, cleanly and silently, and lay crumpled, with wisps of smoke rising from his head. "Oh, clever," Damin sighed, as much to hear the reassurance of his own voice as anything. Now he'd have to break cover and retrieve the body. He couldn't leave it there, like a calling card. He waited a few minutes, listening, and then eased himself onto his injured leg, to limp out into open ground. He dragged the weakway into the bushes, noting the smell of cooked meat. Now he could see what the first weakway had been following, a broad path of tiny animal footprints. The curious Gadans had given him away. He leant out again, checking carefully, and obliterated the drag marks with a branch. Waste not, want not. The weakways wouldn't be needing the blasters or vibroblades now. Damin pulse slowing to normal. Searched the bodies for anything else of use, pocketing data cards and valuables. He didn't feel that he was a thief. He had no personal possessions that weren't the Grand Army's property, and he felt no need to acquire any. But there was a chance the cards contained information that would help him achieve his objective, and the beads and coins would come in handy if he needed to buy or bribe something or someone. He found a suitable spot to hide the bodies. He didn't have time to bury them, but was suddenly aware of movement in the undergrowth, animal movement, and gradually small heads appeared sniffing the air. "Here again, eh?" Daman said, although the Gedans couldn't possibly hear him beyond the helmet. "Way past your bedtime." They edged forward and then swarmed across the weak way with their shattered heads, taking tiny bites as they settled on him in a dark-furred blanket of snapping motion. Daman wouldn't have to worry about burying anyone. The faintest of liquid sounds made him look around at the other weak way. Daman had his rifle aimed instantly. The Weequay wasn't dead, not quite. For some reason, that upset Daman more than he could have ever imagined. He'd killed plenty of times at Geonosis, smashing droids with grenade launchers and cannons at a distance, hyped up on fear and the instinct to live. Survive to fight. But this was different. It wasn't distant, and the debris of the kill wasn't metal. The Weequay's blood had dried in a stream down his glove and right forearm plate, and he hadn't managed a clean kill. That was wrong. They had drilled him to kill and kill and kill, but nobody had thought to teach him what he was supposed to feel afterward. He did feel something, and he wasn't certain what it was. He'd think about it later. Aiming his rifle, he corrected his mistake before the small army of carnivores could move on to the next meal.